Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of video game news for Monday, September 23rd, 2024. Yu-Gi-Oh! Still doing its giveaway for logging in. Of course, that's at this point the only thing I'm actually doing with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just logging in and using it for background audio. Speaking of audio, I've been severely interrupted due to non-YouTube stuff, and some of that has to do with tearing out and reconstructing a floor in my house, which has been all set up at this point, but today is the beginning of demolition, as it were. So if you happen to hear banging and that sort of things in the background, that is what that is, and hopefully that won't come up on the microphone. It probably won't. And hopefully that won't distract me too much. At least while I'm streaming. Which, speaking, it's already distracted me quite a bit. It's been, unfortunately, just another excuse for me to subconsciously not really do as much work as I would hold myself up to the standard of needing to do. I'm trying to open up the that's not what I needed to open up. I'm trying to bring up the right tabs on my Firefox. I had to reset my computer, so I also turned down my CPU and RAM speed, which, yeah, a little underclocking wouldn't really do much of anything, but it might help some of the flickering I've seen. Although inherently, all the flickering does just scream that there's some incompatibility with NVIDIA graphics cards and my AMD CPU and motherboard combo, which is somewhat believable, but even at that, I'm still not sure I would be 100% confident if I was going to build a new computer today that I would go full AMD graphics, AMD Radeon graphics with AMD Ryzen CPU. The announcements of new consoles, and the Steam Deck in particular, are going to play a major role in that, as far as what you really should build PCs towards. Because if the Xbox, the next Xbox, if the next PlayStation, if the next Nintendo console, and the next Steam Deck all went Intel NVIDIA, then obviously you should build an Intel NVIDIA graphics card, PC gaming computer. But if they were to instead all consistently go with the AMD for graphics and videos, then that would change things quite a bit. So I did manage to work. This is interesting. My desktop ticker scroll at the top there is not working, even though the one below it is working. I mean, the one above it is working. I did manage to work on my new version of the macro. I will want to give it a couple days just to make sure all the bugs have been fully worked out, but it does seem to me like I've got it working well enough. Now the question certainly is going to come down to, as we look at the concurrent 24-hour player base chart, most played games, whether by bots or real people. Yeah, the question is if it's really saving me that much time. It definitely feels like it's a little bit faster, but in the long run, I may have just spent a week or two pretending like I should be working on this new version of my macro to really just use it as an excuse to not do much of anything else. Meanwhile, while I was not doing much of anything else, I was watching Shorzy on Hulu, which is an odd, dirty hockey player series. It starts off very rough in the first couple episodes, but by the time you're into the third or fourth episode, I think you get a much better feeling of what the rest of the first two seasons are. And by the time you get to the end of the second season, it's a much better show than where it started off. But it is also very much TVMA. If you don't like hockey fights, if you don't like poop talk, then there's going to be absolutely nothing in Shorzy that you like at all. Because that's pretty much it. The episodes are pretty short. Otherwise, I am still playing my standard fare of Tinkafuma and Memento Mori on my phone while trying out Cardcaptor Sakura Memory Key, which I can already tell you I'm not going to stick with. The game is just terrible. It really is. You're going to more than likely, if you can even stick with it that long, go through the story, relive the events of the first Cardcaptor anime series, possibly not even the movies, and that's in the story mode. And then once you finish the story mode, all you're going to be left with is a whole bunch of microtransaction nonsense, to the extreme really, because there are serial numbers for the high level collectible chibi Sakura Funko Pop type 3D CGI characters. The serial numbers have no value at all. Like, it's just, we give a serial number to every person who gets these high level characters, which means nothing because it's not limited. And it's never going to be limited because they're going to try and microtransaction newer players. If you were a whale going into Memory Key, you would get all the characters very quickly in this beta, unless they just significantly increase the grind and the amount of cost out of beta and reset all the progress for the beta players, which they might do. But they certainly are accepting real money right now, even in the beta. I wouldn't be surprised if they just totally shut down the thing after the beta and call it a loss. But then there's just no game there. Once you're done with the story mode, they've even broken up the story mode to be two separate story modes, where story modes are really telling the A plots of episodes where Sakura would have caught a cloud card, and then there are B plots that they've separated into their own secondary story modes. There is a dress-up mechanic. It's not particularly good because you only get outfits by collecting the chibi Sakuras, and so you can't. You are just going to hit a wall eventually, possibly before you get to the end of the story mode, in which you can't, well, do all of the B-plot story modes. B-plot story modes have the dress-up challenges. But actually it won't be a wall because you can just continue forward anyways and move on to the next chapter even if you fail completely. And then there's many other little side mini-game distraction things that are small and insignificant. like mini gacha games, it has nonsense where it wants you to load in and log in at a very early time for the Western world and a very late time period, so that they want you to log in minimum to get all the extra rewards twice per day, when there's not really a lot of game there to need you to log in twice per day. And anytime you're being that disrespectful of the player's time, you've already made a bad game. But yeah, it is definitely money focused for first, and entertainment focused somewhere around fifth or lower. On top of which, it's just not, because we're talking Cardcaptor Sakura, that's one of the few anime that most Western people would be okay with younger girls or boys looking at. I wouldn't be upset with showing Cardcaptor Sakura, since Sakura herself is only 4 years old, to a 4-year-old. Yeah. Maybe 10-year-olds or 8-year-olds, a better age, but then you run into the major problem with anime in that there's very few other shows that you can say that for. So you definitely would treat it more like, here's a weird cartoon. Most of the during the daylight hours, not the non-late night hour animes that air on TV, never get translated or brought to the West, and tend to not to be that easily translatable. So yeah, you got a few movies, but yeah, 4-year-old kid is kind of hard to even have the attention span to sit through a movie. Bluey is kind of a great example, I think, of the attention span that kids have when they're very young these days. It's just not even 5-minute episodes of things, watching them over and over again possibly, but not inherently sticking through a 28-minute or 22-minute episode even of any other show. So, and yeah, if you were going to spend money on Cardcaptor Sakura, a memory key is not what you should spend the money on there. You would buy the DVDs first and foremost, but then you could certainly buy cloud card props, which would be interesting certainly as a prop to display on the shelf, and figurines, and I'm sure they've got some figurines, stuffed dolls of the Caro character. The concept of memory key, and I'll stop talking about it here in a second, is not a terrible concept, that there would be different versions of Sakura and you would be collecting all the different versions, but the fact that they felt the need to make them chibi 3D CGI Funko Pop characters seems to me to be really crazy, when it really should just be that you would have her in different outfits, and it clearly should be a dress-up game as far as that goes. But even those different outfits are fairly limited to the outfits that were in the anime series. I don't think you can go too much further from that. But yeah. But yeah, first and foremost, it should be just a dress-up game, and with some small side backstory, story mode of some kind of adventure. It even struggles to have a fighting mode, because while in Cardcaptor Sakura she does fight the mischievous cloud cards to get them to submit to her will, it's not like there's sub-minions there. So there aren't generic bad guys that she fights, and the way she fights a lot of the cloud cards isn't particularly in a violent form, as much as it is just convincing it to surrender or submit. There's one section where she finds one character, and the character, the cloud card, just dances with her, just wants to do a ballroom dance. And so then they had to make a whole different mini game in the story mode for that, where you're tapping on the screen. But yeah, like I said, and I think the last stream, Sakura is particularly non-violent as far as any kind of Monster of a Week type show goes. Yep. Do I have anything else to talk about today? Otherwise, though, no. I'm still just kind of sitting around. I spent way too much time yesterday sitting around waiting for cartons to be delivered, and that wasted an entire day. And I was just sitting around so much that I was physically in pain for how much lying down and sitting I had done. I needed to just stand up and do something more physical. Speaking of needing to do something, because I've been running my macro, the chart here, I think, is particularly poorly skewed. I still think the order here will be mostly right, but there's far too many extra samples here, and by having too many days sampled, because it was just being done over and over again on the same day, we can see where the color palette's going to go here. So clearly I need to put some kind of outline around these bars if I can, and I might have to just do it with modifying the CSS instead of doing it through Google Sheets itself. But it's going to hit a dark blue that happens to just line up perfectly, or close enough at least, with the background, and it looks like there's an entire section that's chopped off here. And eventually we will get to the point where these colors make sense. So it goes kind of normal level of colors to lighter colors to seems like extremely light colors for no reason, and then extremely dark colors. And then I wouldn't be surprised if what happens after that is that it cycles back around. Overall, though, assuming the chart is correct, seems like PUBG has made it to the second spot, and Black Mesa Wukong is in the third spot as far as the most played game so far. And then if I try to think about what people really are talking about and playing right now, I assume it would still be that a lot of people are playing the PlayStation game, which would not show up because it's not on PC. Yeah. We're not quite to the point where I'm expecting big shifts in new games to come out, but I do expect that to happen fairly quickly. Today's September 23rd. November 25th is Thanksgiving in the United States. That's when your Black Friday happens. That's when big games potentially should be purchased in large amounts. I sure hope that people are currently banging on my floor know what they're doing, although I'm not 100% opposed to the idea of them screwing it up so bad that the whole room or whole house even just falls down. I don't want it to fall down on my stuff or me or hurt anybody, but if a smooth insurance claim could be made, or bond insurance claim could be made to just build a whole new house where this one stands, that would be incredibly beneficial because my house is not young, it's not new, so a new house would be hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars more valuable. Plus, it would be built to much more modern standards and much higher requirements as far as just stability, safety, energy efficiency, things like that, plumbing. Yeah. Not everything newer is always better, particularly in construction, but a lot of it certainly is. Anyways, let's go through Video Games Chronicle news. What I'm going to do here is go through everything once, and then we'll see, go through everything kind of a second time to see if I missed anything between yesterday when I ran it and today when I ran the macro. There probably won't be much of a difference. I doubt very little video game news came out on a Sunday, but yeah, we shall see. So the Pokemon trading card game illustration contest 2024 winners were announced. The winner will receive $5,000 and their drawing will be made into a Pokemon trading card game. Remember, I believe this was the contest where several contestants were kicked out being accused of using AI generation. I wonder if perhaps them suing the Palworld was also timed to happen just before this announcement happened. I doubt it. Yeah. There is also, I've heard people are getting their hands on the trading card game, mobile Pokemon trading card game, and it seems like it has been simplified to be much more like Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, in the sense that instead of there being 5 slots where you can put a Pokemon, there's going to only be 3 slots to fit the vertical screen format of a cell phone, and instead of having energy cards, you're just going to have like an energy pool that you can use. So it might be also an effort to make something that's a little bit faster and easier, even for compared to the original Pokemon trading card game. But it also certainly highlights that, from what I hear, the focus of the mobile game is going to be very heavy on digitally collecting Pokemon cards and displaying them and sorting them and organizing them, and very light on actually encouraging people to play, to the point where I haven't actually heard that you can trade cards in the app. So a trading card game app that may very well not allow you or not make it easy to trade cards. I wouldn't be surprised if it is heavily microtransactioned at a very high price to just buy these digital Pokemon cards. And it would be a little weird, but it probably is the way of the future, that at some point they may just stop printing real world physical cards and shipping them to stores. They might only ship them direct via their own format. Printing on paper is not going to get much cheaper than it is already in the future, so yeah, putting them in storefronts and having them printed on paper in the first place may be something that they would like to see go away in favor of the zero cost that it is to make digital format cards. Well, very little cost. You have to pay an artist and that's about it, assuming you're not using AI to make the cards. Apparently dozens of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom streams appear online almost a week before the release, which, okay, I imagine Nintendo's not happy about that, but I I also wouldn't be surprised if they kind of just don't care, because I'm not sure the Zelda Echoes of Wisdom game was anything that they ever were putting a lot of faith into anyways. It may very well be the case that this game comes out, people talk about it, and for a couple days and then move on. Super Mario RPG right now is on the daily sale for Woot.com, subsidiary of Amazon.com. So if you wanted to play the new version of Super Mario RPG, now would be a great time to grab it. Although it's still $35, so you're not getting major discounts on Nintendo games. Metaphor ReFantasio is going to sponsor the Haas F1 driver during the Singapore Grand Prix. Nico Hulkenberg shares a name with one of the game's main characters. That's an interesting crossover if it was done in the West, but since it's being done only in Singapore, I imagine that could be very standard, or could become very standard. I imagine, like many sponsorships, the actual drivers have no idea as far as what names and brands are being put on the car. What would be really funny is if this eventually evolved into the point where you've got entire lewd anime girls painted on the side of the F1 cars, which I imagine they would resist that for a very long time if it was ever suggested. Of course, if F1 was losing viewership, they might go forward, because inherently that could be the case now. In the West, F1, you could have beer companies and big boobed live action characters selling beer or sodas on the sides of cars, and yeah, they try to keep everything family friendly, and they're always looking to have a child audience continue to come and grow on these kinds of sports. Personally, I'm still not sure why people would want to spend the investment to like racing and actually watch it, because whether you're talking NASCAR or Formula One, it's just too slow of an experience, which is kind of crazy. It's too repetitive of an experience, I guess, and too long overall of an experience, where perhaps it would make a lot more sense if it was something closer to like horse racing, where there was just a lot of races that happened over a long period of day with far fewer laps. Like 100 races in a day even might make some sense. Moving on. It's been estimated here that Sony's Concorde cost $400 million to develop. It was reportedly referred to as the future of PlayStation internally. That alone might be the reason why it was shoved out to fail, in that new leadership doesn't want the future set in stone by previous leadership developing a game. Yeah. Although new leadership may also be secretly still hoping that they can revitalize Concorde in some way. They did a very poor job in publishing Concorde, if that was the case. 2 or 3 times the amount it cost to development might have been what you would have needed to spend to properly advertise, and so maybe that was just way too expensive in the long run. If you're talking like $1.2 billion in total to advertise and promote the game, you may never get that back. But yeah, I guess the question there is, if you could get 300,000 people to pay for the game at $60, then you would have probably had 2.6 well, $1.8 billion there just to cover costs. So you wouldn't even be profiting until after that point. So yeah, this would have been a game where they would have had to have gotten 500,000 to 1 million people playing it, which maybe could have worked if there actually is a game there. The thing that's weird about this is Concord just wasn't around long enough for anybody to say that they really hated how it played or that they really loved how it played. Obviously people weren't singing its praises as far as how it played on day one, so it probably was just an average game as far as how it played. But that would have been the thing that would have really changed things. I doubt that a lot of people just absolutely love the visuals or the story of Call of Duty, Warzone, Destiny, Team Fortress, Counter-Strike Go. Those are just games that play very well, they look good enough, and it's where the player base is. Apparently Silent Hill 2's remake is going to be exclusive to the PlayStation for at least 1 year. The game is going to be released on PC and PS5 next month. So exclusive here really only meaning console exclusive, which is pretty much all that exclusive these days actually means, is that it is a console exclusive. I did some tweaking here and I think I've done a pretty good job. There may be still some room for some small tweaking, but I'm not even going to really bother with it if it's just tiny amounts of tweaking. It still feels to me like the font here could be a little bit bigger. And maybe there's something here I could do that just make it a little bit taller. And yeah, depending on the images the Video Games Chronicles use, a lot of these images are very wide. I'm having to scale them down when they could be maybe a little bit bigger, less padding. Like, pretty obviously I can make this go at the same aspect ratio to at least this point and at least that point. Xbox's Tokyo Game Show 2024 broadcast details confirmed. Xbox will also have a presence on the show floor. Microsoft's still giving it the college try, as it were, in Japan. Not that it's really ever going to become super popular or successful there, unless there was something like the next Nintendo coming out at such a high price that all of a sudden the Xbox Series X is cheaper. And even at that, I'm still not sure that would convince many Japanese people to buy it. Sony unveiled a new Like a Dragon game, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii. So this is a full-on spin-off game. I thought this would have been a DLC thing, but interesting. I don't know if that's gonna... I guess this might speak to the Yakuza series becoming more and more popular, which maybe it is, at least in Japan or even in the West, that a spin-off game makes sense. Although there's kind of a long tradition of spin-off silly games that have been only released in Japan, so it's interesting that this one seems like it's coming to the West. Liza P. director shares updates on the DLC along with a new screenshot. A sequel is also in development. So Liza P, not a lot of people talked about it, but definitely seems like it went to a certain level of success that they would make DLC and talk about a sequel. The question, I guess, is Liza P the new Bloodborne, or is Elden Ring the new Bloodborne? And are we potentially going to get an Elden Ring 2? Or are we at a point now where the Dark Souls, Demon Souls, Bloodborne series of games became so popular to form a genre, and now that the genre has been really formed, there's actual competition. We might start to see the fan bases split a little bit, and some people go to Liza P and some people go to Elden Ring. It may also be the case that it's less of a splitting and it's more of a just there's a high enough demand for 2 or 3 of these Bloodborne, Demon Souls type games to exist in a shorter amount of time. Netflix released trailers for an animated Devil May Cry, Splinter Cell, Tomb Raider, and Cyberpunk shows. So they are going fairly heavy in making animated shows based on video games. This may very well be directly related to the success of Cyberpunk years ago, and just show how long it takes to really make one of these series. It might even be from the success of the Castlevania series even longer ago. Tomb Raider: The Legend of Lara Croft is coming October 10th, and it's set after the events of the reboot, but it does show her in her normal outfit with guns too. So at least as far as this show is concerned, that they are trying to bring her back to being more close to what the previous Lara Croft games were. That being said, as far as the game series is concerned, I don't think they are going to even care about any of that, and they're going to just reboot her again. Although I do imagine they will try to reboot her to make her more similar to her appearance with 2 guns and less about bows and arrows and crafting and generally just being a weakly written character. Devil May Cry here is animated in a way that doesn't really look like any of the games, I'd also say. And then I question about the Cyberpunk series, in that it's probably not going to include any of the characters from the first Cyberpunk series, so it probably is just going to be a whole new thing. And frankly, I just didn't think the Cyberpunk anime was anywhere as good as people were saying it was. I don't understand why people were so enthusiastic about that, but my best guess, and this I assume is that there's just a lot of people who know what anime is but have not seen a lot of it and have not really engaged with it, and so they are just very much fair weather fans, surface level fans, the kinds of people who would say Dragon Ball Z is the best anime ever, or that the Dragon Ball series in total, including the non-canonical Dragon Ball GT, is the best series ever, which I saw a Crunchyroll ad for that, and I'm like, no. If you go look at my anime list, Dragon Ball, any of the Dragon Ball series are not even in the top 200 of anime series out there. There's just no way. No fighting anime is likely going to be the best anime ever, just because of their nature of power creep and filler episodes and entire series that have reboots and remakes inherently are admitting that their original versions weren't up to snuff. Dragon Ball certainly, and Dragon Ball Z in particular, certainly was foundational. It was a stepping stone. If you said Dragon Ball Z was the best anime when it came out, then yeah, there's a lot better of an argument there. But a lot of people that would say Dragon Ball in general, including the Dragon Ball series, which is completely different than Dragon Ball Z, or fairly different. A lot of people that are saying that would say that is the best ever, just likely wouldn't ever watch something like Magical Modica or Your Name or Ghost in the Shell or Kira, even for some shows that were around at the same time. That those different genres, different storytellings, are just not even going to be under their consideration, and those are very different types of stories. Yeah. And inherently something like Your Name, which is just a movie, only has to be good for a couple hours, where Dragon Ball Z has to be great for its entire run, which it really isn't. I heard the major suggestion was to just end after like the Cell Saga in Dragon Ball Z and not even bother to watch the Majin Buu saga after that, because it's pretty repetitive. But yeah, my neighbor Totoro is more than likely one of the ones to consider as far as the best anime ever. It's a Studio Ghibli classic, it's kid friendly, it's very foundational. You could again show it to like a 4-year-old. Spirited Away is a little bit older, but kind of the same idea. And those kinds of Ghibli 2-hour movies make a lot of sense to be considered the best anime ever if you're going to. But the argument itself is kind of a stupid argument to even make for Crunchyroll to make it as an ad, because what you're really arguing is what is the best animation ever. And if you would just exclude anime and Eastern animation and think about what is the best Western animation ever, I mean, it's very much comparing apples to oranges. Are you going to say something like Frozen as an animation is better than Inside Out as a CGI animation is better than, say, Sleeping Beauty, which when it first came out would have definitely been the best animation ever, just due to the lack of competition? But then how do you compare something like Frozen as an animated movie to, say, Teen Titans Go as an animated cartoon, or Bugs Bunny Looney Tunes type animations? I mean, the whole style and the whole argument really doesn't make any sense at all. If you got away from animation and said what is the best live action movie ever, that too is just a ridiculous argument. It's too broad, it's too apples and oranges as far as a comparison, and it's going to severely be influenced by opinions. You could say Ben-Hur Gone with the Wind might be considered the highest critically reviewed movie ever, but a lot of people are going to watch Fight Club way more than they would ever sit through Gone with the Wind or Ben-Hur or something like that. And how do you compare Gone with the Wind to Fight Club or The Matrix, or which Matrix inherently stole a lot of its styles from anime? It's just a dumb argument. It's the kind of dumb nerd arguments that anime fans in general used to have. I don't even know if they do anymore. The internet has changed a lot, and new generations just seem like they are not as nerdy about that. Comic book nerds may still be somewhat like that, but the comic book nerds that may be nerdy about that may be 40, 50, 60 years old at this point. Not sure if there are new comic book fans, and if they really do make the Batman stronger than Superman, who would win in a fight type arguments. I think a lot of those arguments were straight up perpetrated and made by the comic creators themselves, who are now extremely old comic book nerds. Anyways, back to video game news. I'm rambling here. Concord's director is reportedly stepping down as the game's return remains in limbo. Ryan Ellis told staff last week that he would no longer lead as game director. It's interesting how Video Games Chronicle has had two reportedly headlines from Concord. But yeah, that certainly doesn't inspire any confidence, although new leadership probably is needed if we're going to have any hope of turning it around. I think we'd already talked about this, but 2 Point Museum gets a release date and exclusive Sonic pre-order items. Krafton CEO says it acquired Tango for its creativity, and that even if Hi-Fi Rush 2 won't make money, they want that creativity. Or they want more teams like that under their umbrella, is the exact quote. Which is a pretty smart way to respond to questions or rumors, or it's a pretty smart thing to just offer up and say, is that you want creative people. Although it may bite Krafton in the butt when they start laying off employees that worked on Hi-Fi Rush, because then all of a sudden they just come back as liars when they're getting rid of expensive employees that would potentially be creative. Unfortunately, it is definitely the case that very few industries want creativity at all outside of art industries of TV, video games, movies, writing, music, and even in those industries there's a lot of positions that do not want any level of creativity. But yeah, it's a shame, because I would imagine your average human probably, before they are discouraged from being creative, starts off as being fairly creative as kids, and there's just not really great outlets for it, particularly in the West. Most kids are not encouraged to draw, paint, write stories as a hobby. They are encouraged to ingest other people's creations and be good little consumers. And I'm not sure if there's really a major conspiracy as to why that is the case, but there definitely are commercials that are literally conspiring to convince kids to consume instead of create, when society as a whole needs more creators and a little less consuming. But yeah, if you're a parent, I definitely encourage kids to always have a notebook, always have a sketch pad on them ready to go, and be encouraged to be creative. Of course, there's some parenting elements there where kids very young talk silly, make up silly stories or talk nonsense and get shouted down from their parents for talking nonsense or being silly, and I don't think parents should do that. And kids certainly at an early age confuse reality from fiction, so they may be telling you a story they made up in their mind and saying it like it really happened. And some parents, I think, are not good at handling or understanding that either. Moving on to the Gematsu articles, I'm still not 100% sure that I've got the Gematsu part of the macro working perfectly, and that is something I need to keep an eye out for. It may be the case that it's actually only opening links that are on page 1 and not page 2, or vice versa. It does seem like there's some links that are just not getting clicked for Gematsu, so I'm gonna need to double check that. The Tales of the Shire Lords of the Rings game launches March 25th, 2025. The weekly Japanese game releases came out. And weirdly, after this we have a link to a Steam game. I'm not sure why. Would have been a link to a Steam game here. Although I guess that would happen if any of these games were released on Steam. Yep, that says Steam there, so that would be the one link that gets clicked on. My curation to automatically open Steam links will only open the first one that says Steam. It won't open any of the others. There's a long list of digital games, digital only games that came out. Yeah, another Monopoly coming out for Switch. And I guess Zelda Echoes of Wisdom or Legend of Heroes might be the big name games. Epic Mickey Rebrushed might get some fandom too. And so then this page, and I think this is going to be a case, well, this page is not going to be that big of a deal. Now, unfortunately, I am feeling the need to take a bathroom break, so I'm going to pause the recording and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. So, yeah, next Gematsu story. We don't really have a lot of them, and that's why I wonder if I am missing a lot of stories here. Is that the next headline is Duet Night Abyss Tokyo Game Show 2024 teaser trailer is available. And again, if I were to move this down a little bit, I could probably scale this up a little bit bigger. So I do have this kind of desire to tinker still a little bit with it. And in this case, Gematsu had at least the headers here are big enough to read, and this is, I think, big enough to read. In particular, I'm trying to get the font to be big enough for both me to read from 8 feet away, which is far too far away, and I had a solution for that, and that's been delayed. Well, I was going to move the monitor closer for my failing eyesight, but I'm also trying to make it big enough where if somebody was actually watching this on a TV, they could see it, and also big enough where if somebody's watching this on a cell phone, they can read it, which actually doesn't have to be that big because most people have cell phones right in front of their face, not 10 feet away. YouTube announced a whole bunch of new features, and none of it seems to be focused at all with pre-recorded footage or horizontal footage at all. It's 100% how can we rip off and add features that probably already exist in things like Instagram and TikTok, and that seems to be very much where their focus is. Meanwhile, the new CEO ran away to India and rubbed elbows with the politicians in India, which is an interesting thing certainly to do, and only barely tweeted anything on his personal Twitter about any of the new updates. And even when he did do that, their big event showing off all the new features is still very much trying to get celebrities to join YouTube versus caring about even medium or large or medium large size streamers. Moving on, To the Moon for PS5, Xbox Series launches October 8th. Of course, this one has a link to Steam, and yet it didn't open, which that's weird. Why that wouldn't have been the case. Like, very much my macro should have brought this out. Yeah. Yeah, it didn't. So there's something being missed there. Then if we're getting back to like Slitterhead detailing Rarity's character skills and Qualong Slum stage, that's actually pretty old news story. Rydo Ultimate Ninja Storm coming to iOS and Android. Now, with these announcements, this is an older announcement of, in this case, this is an older game being ported to iOS and Android, but with announcements of more cell phone games being made from the bigger game developers and not just random game developers that only have made cell phone games that are of no real relevancy, there is rumors that we'll talk about later that for Linux, where it actually is doable, SteamOS may be experimenting with both Arch 64 support, which I don't think too many things are going to really need Arch 64 support. That would be inherently a cell phone app that is not also an Android app. So it's probably more of a weird Linux app if it was built on Arch 64 than that. But it might be trivial to support Arch 64 in Linux. But more importantly, I think, is the Waydroid support. And with Wayland and Waydroid support, that implies two things. One, that they are moving closer towards actually supporting Wayland as the desktop animator instead of the Steam in-between app that they are using. I think that's called GameScope. But yeah, it may take them years to actually get to pure Wayland support as more of an open standard, and it may just never happen because in the same way that Wine and Proton are effectively the same thing or very close to the same thing, but one's going to be the thing that Steam supports, which is Proton, where Wine is not going to be what Steam supports. But yeah, with Android support through Waydroid, though, we may very well see the Steam Deck use that as a major sales point, that the next Steam Deck or the next version of SteamOS in particular, whether connected to a Steam Deck or not, is going to allow through some kind of Steam store for you to buy Android apps and potentially pay microtransactions through Steam for Android apps to play Android games. It's still very much a case, though, where very few Android games right now are good enough to bother with that. But there's a few, certainly. There's definitely a few. It is kind of crazy to play one of the Android games on the Steam Deck. You have to install a whole separate launcher to do it. And yeah, I can see Fortnite being a thing, certainly. If all of a sudden Fortnite shows up on SteamOS as an Android app, and then all of a sudden Fortnite is on the Steam storefront, that would be a big change by Epic and Epic Game Store as far as their exclusivity, but they may very well go for it if it gets them more money. Anyways, moving on. And then Sword Art Online Fractured Daydream system trailer is also available on Gematsu. Yeah, as far as other tinkering, though, I think I've kind of gotten everything set fairly perfectly where I want it set. None of those Gematsu articles of the 5 we looked at actually had an image that was really small or really big. I did, I think, for Gematsu do some tinkering that I didn't show, and that on those rare occasions where we get a story where there's a long bunch of pictures and you scroll down and the pictures are super big and you can't even fit the picture onto one frame of the screen, I've shrunk down those images. It's not particularly perfect, but it's, I think, about the best I can do to make it more reasonable. Anyways, we'll move on to GameDeveloper.com. I suspect my macro is opening all the news from GameDeveloper.com and from Video Games Chronicle. That seems to be working, and it seems like it's been working for a while. Unity 6 is going to launch globally on October 17th. Unity intends to be the next iteration of the game engine with deeper long-term support. In a lot of ways, this is, I think, Unity under new leadership just trying to change the narrative and get people excited. Inherently, though, I think the damage is done. How much damage, I'm not sure, but I think a lot of people now have begun development, or at least are planning on starting their next project with the Godot engine instead of Unity. And it's not like Unity has completely changed things around. And then there is still very much a case where if you want hyper-realistic shooter games, you would use the Unreal Engine. And if you want to make something that's more of a mobile game looking and cross-platforming, you probably would want to use the Godot engine at this point. The Unity Asset Store itself perhaps would be the biggest draw, but I don't know how they make that more popular than it already is. And it's only a big draw to low effort asset flippers. Anyways, they scrapped their runtime fee, but then they've tweaked their fees in other ways. And I'm not sure that they have any like new features that they are really promoting here on Unity 6. I'm trying to scroll down here and read it, but it doesn't seem like there is. It says Unity 6 will offer customizable graphics rendering for greater control over their game, simplified multiplayer, game development to accelerate journey through entire game development life cycles, and robust tools to build rich games optimized for web browsers. Which, how many people should be thinking about making a web browser game in 2024? It should be basically nobody. I don't think there's anybody that should be making web browser games at this point. That's ridiculous. That would be, unless you're making some kind of spin the wheel to win a prize for a shop. That's about the only game, quote unquote, that should be made for web browsers. We haven't really heard anything new as far as Nintendo suing Palworld, and this probably will be a slow process. This goes to show pretty much exactly what I want as far as the size of the screen, but I would kind of like to tweak the fonts, and you'd think it would be as easy as just saying, hey, make the font a little bit bigger, but there's scaling issues that are being applied on top of the font sizes, whether it's coming from one website versus another website. So it's just not consistent. It is also an issue that GameDeveloper.com has a tendency to be more wordy in their headlines. So if I made the font too big here, it would just wrap around into a new level. And otherwise, I kind of don't even care about what the size of the font is here. Arguably, this font is too small when I scroll down, but yeah, it's not even worth messing with. EA's Skype rival is riding into early access. Here's an example of wordiness. And this is also an example where I need to add the balancing factor, as far as I did it for some but not all, so that the text would be more balanced when it does wrap around. So I'll have to tweak that. Kabam has shut down Disney Mirrorverse after 2.5 years, not even making the average 3 years for a mobile game. Although, in fairness, I have never heard of Disney Mirrorverse. It was a crossover action RPG for iOS and Android. And I have no idea who this character is supposed to be. Is this a League of Legends character, or is that supposed to be the Brave character? Yeah. Inherently, it really is a case where a lot of these mobile games are designed to just get as much money out of its players for a year or two, maybe 3, and then just shut down. And they just have no long-term plan at all. They see the number of purchases or the player base going down, and then with a knee-jerk reaction shut it down. It's a real shame for game preservation, but it's also, I don't think, a thing that many gamers are mourning, because I don't think too many people are playing these games in the first place. This is, on the face of it, a Disney crossover action RPG. Sounds like exactly what Disney would want. Probably not just on cell phones, though. They probably want it on consoles, because if you have Kingdom Hearts, which is an action RPG game, perhaps more just a turn-based RPG game, but in modern times you really would want to make it action RPG and not a turn-based RPG. So yeah, you take the idea of Kingdom Hearts, you get rid of the Final Fantasy characters, and a Disney crossover action RPG is exactly what Disney would want. The crossover element here, I assume, is just characters from Brave and characters from Sleeping Beauty crossing over, not crossovers to other people, although maybe they did have some special events where some other characters from other universes might have been added. But yeah, there's also a factor when one of these mobile game companies makes one game, they don't seem like they have enough of a support staff to maintain that game after they start developing a new game. Although Nikkei, what is it? No, that's not the name of the game, is it? Shift Up's mobile game, their second mobile game, is still going somewhat. Last time I heard, it's still going after Stellar Blade came out. Although you don't really have to support Stellar Blade that much because it's just a single player experience. It'll be interesting to see what Shift Up's next game does to its lineup, however. Their first mobile game got shut down after a fairly long amount of time, though, so I think it was at least 5 years that Destiny Child went. Moving on. Proletariat Spellbreaker lives on as a free player run game. Which, yeah. If it's a case that you can give the entire game for free to let the players run it, and there's enough of a fan base that wants to do that, you would think that there's something else you could do with that content, but who knows. Here we have Square Enix Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth not meeting Square Enix's expectations. And here's another example of where GameDeveloper.com can get wordy. So that's almost exactly right as far as the space. But ideally, I could lose about half this space. Like, there's really no reason to want empty negative space in large amounts on a page, because I'm constantly just tweaking it. There's really not a lot to say about Square Enix being disappointed. That's their default state always. And these are older stories. Behavior Interactive confirming it shut down mid-winter entertainment. And I reset my computer, so every one of these tabs is reloading every time I click on it. Unity has brought the Struct UGC tool to web platform GameCrazy. Struct is billed as an easy-to-use development tool on both Unity and GameCrazy, as it hopes heralds a boom of UGC-made games on the platform. So, yeah. Seems like Unity is continuously trying to court new developers, which is what it should be doing, obviously. I'm not sure it's going to really succeed, though. And they're not doing the wrong thing, it's just hard to give them credit after all the terrible things previous leadership did. Ubisoft is calling developers back into the office for 3 days a week. Okay. There is an interesting argument to be made as far as how much remote work can be made around game development versus how much work really needs to be done in more of a collaborative environment. A lot of remote work, if you're just the only person working on it and you just need to turn in your accounting numbers, or if you're just an architect only working by yourself designing a house, which you're probably not doing that when you're an architect, and in a lot of scenarios you're probably collaborating a lot more than it would seem. An author from home is probably the only person authoring the book, so the remote work there makes a lot of sense. But game development probably is best when it is a collaborative environment, and there is something to be said about being able to walk over to somebody else's desk and talk to them and have a chat, and just be in a different location and a different mindset. Maybe, though, I think what the reality is that a middle ground probably needs to be designed, in that there could be group meetings once a week, twice a week, every day, every morning, maybe every evening as right before work, that there's just group meetings that happen and chat, and maybe all of that really is just good enough anyways. We really haven't heard any claims or accusations of people doing remote work and then just not being available to be talked to, emails not being able to be sent or not being responded to. But yeah, I don't know. I think most of it really is just an effort to get people to quit because they don't want to come back from remote work. Then it really is a case that Ubisoft games would get significantly better by bringing people back to the office 3 days a week. It would be better for the environment and for the world overall if remote work was just the mandatory default, governmentally enforced, and the idea of commuting to work or commuting to a job is extremely rare and requires some kind of special government approval waiver. Obviously, firemen, paramedics, police officers have to commute to their jobs. Factory workers might need to be bused and picked up by their employers to their jobs, although there is a real danger there of you get on a bus to a job and then they decide not to take you back home when you want to go home. So yeah, there's an issue there too. Maybe it would be better to have them just taxied or something like that, but yeah, a lot of jobs could be done remotely. a lot of jobs are kind of pointless and shouldn't exist in the first place. Once you start to really consider how this system could be changed and should be changed, you start to see that the system inherently needs to be drastically changed because there's a whole bunch of nonsense built around it. I imagine it is also a case where we have a bit of a bias here, and that we see stories of video game companies imposing back to work, back to office mandates, whereas many other people were never allowed to do remote work in the first place, or have always been forced back to work 5 days a week or every day a week. And then in Australia, this is probably it's maybe a little extreme, but it's probably a good idea, frankly, to put some pressure on the game industry. Games featuring paid loot boxes will soon receive a mandatory M for mature rating in Australia. The Australian government doesn't want titles featuring in-game purchases with an element of chance being recommended to children under 15 years of age, which M for mature, I guess, is 15 and older in Australia, so that might affect the difference there too. Whereas I think the ESRB's M for mature is like 18, maybe 17 plus. So there's maybe a slight difference there. But I'd like to see other countries follow suit, really. That would make a lot of sense. Here's a case where tweaking this might actually be a mistake, because if I tweak it to take up a little bit less space, and then both the top headline and the subheadline take up 2 lines, it would get clipped off. Yeah, but it still would probably be fine in that rare occasion. I can only really adjust things to the average. I don't think I tweaked this headline, this interstitial page, because that definitely feels like that should be a little bit higher, and this should be a little bit higher. And I'm not 100% sure that my curation is fully working, as we can go ahead and look at all the new games that came out on Steam quickly here. I noticed that sexual content in particular is not being ignored, and just out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to ignore games that are tagged sexual content also, which inherently might eliminate some legitimate games, but just better. I also know that one of my YouTube shorts came out and the headline and it was made wrong. I really don't care enough, though, to be 100% accurate on that automated system. So if somebody finds a YouTube shorts that's wrong, I guess good for them is about all I would say there. No. Apparently, when I went to the bathroom, the update here with my floors, that the wood was sitting directly on dirt, and the moisture from the earth was slowly, over the course of at least 10 years, being absorbed and rotting the wood out. Which, yeah, that's why you try very hard to not allow moisture to sit on wood if you build a house correctly. And even if you're just building a fence, you try very hard to not have the bottoms of the fences sit directly on the ground. This is a Lego simulation game, but probably won't go anywhere. hopefully the construction people will fix it correctly and that won't be a problem. Inherently, they could have put down a vapor barrier of in the form of a tarp, waterproof tarp, or they could have put down a foam, which is less commonly done, as a vapor barrier. And that will pretty much fix the problem. Yeah, hopefully. So I don't think I'm going to get my wish of the whole building or whole house collapsing. I did have a half thought if they were going to just at some point decide that they needed to prop up the ceilings and the walls, which, yeah, would be somewhat believable, but maybe they wouldn't have needed to do that, because they are doing kind of a weird thing in that they are tearing out the inside, the interior flooring, while trying to leave the exterior walls untouched. Which is weird. But yeah, when I went in there and looked at it, I definitely could smell mildew and wood rot and moisture in general. Much more than I couldn't smell that before. And the floor is there, but the floor clearly seemed like it was getting moisture built around it. Of course, now the problem with any construction project is it going to be done right, and is it going to be done in a reasonably timely manner, or am I setting myself up here for great misery, as it may take forever, contractors might disappear, or worse than any of that is it's just done wrong. Kind of doesn't matter if it takes a really long time, as long as it's not an insanely long amount of time, if it's done right. If it's done fast and wrong, that's worse. But it also does, certainly would suck if 6 months later it's still being worked on. I don't think that's going to happen though. I think this will probably be dealt with in a shockingly short amount of time, and then I'm hoping everything will be fixed and no more problems. Inherently though, this is only just a side distraction on top of the medium emergency that I'm still living through, and so inherently fixing the flooring won't alleviate the medium emergency of me getting interrupted and having to help and do things that are not on YouTube at all. So I'm still not really going to be in a great position as far as getting back to making pre-recorded content. And with that, there is a real danger, because I've always been in this weird position where I'm playing older games anyways, and a lot of times I'm playing games that I've played before, so I'm saying something that I had thought of maybe years earlier, or I'm reminiscing on something that I've thought of years later. See, this one is September 20th, and today is September 23rd, so wouldn't be surprised if the rest of the games here are things I've already looked at, and I might just hit a point here where I'm confident enough to say I can close everything past that point. course, if I see things like Karate Kid, which does have a level of relevancy, I'm gonna say no to that. Then clearly I missed something. I think a lot of my screen flickering issues may not have anything to do with my video card or RAM or CPU being clocked too high. It may very well have to do with just weirdness on how Firefox does its thing. Yeah, I am very much in this weird position where even originally when I was making pre-recorded content I was playing older games, and I'm still going to be playing older games. And so I'm not sure that I am close enough to your average gamer's opinions or thoughts. Perhaps that's part of the reason why my YouTube channel has never really become super popular. But yeah, there's definitely a thought there that maybe I'm not playing enough games, maybe I'm not playing newer games. Okay. And so that was that was the games that came out when I ran the macro yesterday. So now we're going to go in circles. We're not quite done. Not quite done for a couple reasons. We're going to go in circles as far as games that news articles and things. I'm losing my train of thought here. What I'm looking at right now is actually my follow list cleanup, so this actually doesn't even matter. That's something I need to work on later. This is where we need to be. So this is where I ran the macro a second time, and let's see if there are any new news stories. Tales of the Shire getting a release date. Notice no picture here from Video Games Chronicle. Double Dragon artist says Arc System Works revival shows no respect to the original game. None of the original developers acknowledge it as a Double Dragon game, he claims. So the original artist not happy with the new art style, which I don't think there are too many people that really care about Double Dragon in the first place. And certainly this is just a case where Double Dragon's such an old game with its 8 or maybe 16-bit graphics in later versions that you kind of need to make something new. Of course, this has always been the concern, particularly in animation, whether you're talking anime or video games or other forms of animation, that 3D CGI was just going to constantly become the only way animators know how to animate anything. And when something calls for 2D animation, which I would argue maybe Double Dragon is something more nostalgic that should have called for a flatter 2D animation, animators are not willing or capable of doing that. But yeah, this will be interesting to see if the fandom shows up, if any fandom shows up for a new Double Dragon game. Inherently beat 'em up games just don't really sell particularly well. They're an older style of game that made a lot more sense in arcades when you had less time and when they were trying to get quarters out of players. I suppose if you compared this remake to the Ninja Turtles game, the most recent one, that was much more true to the animation style, but it also didn't knock people's socks off and bring a whole new audience of beat 'em up fans to the series. So it does definitely feel like it's a damned if you do and damned if you don't issue, where you really should just not. I almost want to click on this person's YouTube video, but I won't do that. But yeah, you really should just not make new beat 'em up games. Would be the right move, as far as if you're trying to make something popular. I don't think the CGI is going to really hurt it. Platinum Games has acquired the Wonderful 101 trademark from Nintendo, which, okay, Platinum Games is a super fan of the game Wonderful 101 that they made. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a Wonderful 101-2 or a Wonderful 102 show up at some point. It may also be a case that we might see Wonderful 101 comes out and makes a PC version of the game. Platinum Games, kind of a different company though at this point than what they were when they made Wonderful 101, so they also are kind of in a weird situation where they can't do anything more, I think, with Bayonetta. I don't think we're going to see a Bayonetta 4. We might see a soft reboot of the series, but even Bayonetta 3 felt like it was trying to be a bit soft reboot. I think we'll probably have to see something totally new from Platinum Games to catch people's attention. Prices for the 30th anniversary PS5 digital and DualSense controller have reportedly been revealed. The amount available seems to be more of the controversy than the price, but apparently it's $50 more for the extra skins, which isn't super crazy. Then we talked about the Pokemon trading card game illustration contest. And somehow we have a link to a Japanese only game here. And then we talked about this news story. And yeah. So as far as Video Games Chronicles is concerned, there was only a couple of news stories that happened between when I ran it yesterday and when I ran it today. And even now it looks like there's some news stories that we can see the headlines for. We won't bother going through them at the moment. Now, this brings us to our second look as far as Gematsu articles. Atari 50th Anniversary Celebration DLC, The Wider World of Atari, launches September 26, including 19 playable games and 8 video segments. Blasphemous 2 DLC Mea Culpa launches October 31st, alongside a free update of True Torment. I kind of had forgotten that Blasphemous 2 had even been made. Blasphemous is another one of those games that I probably would want to play, but I'm a little afraid that it might be too difficult. And frankly, there's just a lot of games I haven't gotten around to buying or playing, and it is just kind of a feeding on itself issue that, yeah, you really shouldn't feel bad about not playing enough video games, but there's so much to play and so much I'd really like to play, and I'm just not getting around to it. I just don't have the energy to even do things that I want to do, or the motivation. It's a shame. I've often thought about the fantasy of what if I could freeze time I'm sure this is pretty much a normal fantasy for most people to have every now and then, and unfortunately, I really do believe if I had the ability to freeze time, and I just wouldn't age or need to eat or anything like that, I still probably would just be tired and just not really feel like it. Like, it would be something that I think I would flippantly not use as much as one could. Of course, there's plenty of times when you can freeze time, it would be very helpful. You can walk into a bank, walk out with a few $1 million, certainly that would be helpful. But at the end of the day, it is just the amount of motivation and energy one has, and I just don't think I have as much as the average person, to the point where, in retrospect, it's a tempting argument to make that I definitely had some friends in school and such that may have asked me to go out and hang with them, and I probably told them no, in part out of laziness or just tiredness. And so I probably did hurt some relationships just by not being energetic enough to hang out and just be there and watch the TV shows that they were watching, or go to the football games or whatever that they wanted to do. Just not being presence in the presence, which I guess that is a bit of advice I can give to anybody, any kid or anybody out there, is that be present in the presence. Like, if you go out of your way, spend the extra energy to you know, be interested, act interested in the things that your friends are interested in, because they're gonna just get negative feedback every time they say, hey, did you see that latest episode of this TV show or this streaming show? Did you see this new streaming show? If your answer is just always no, I was too tired, I was sleeping, I was taking care of my kids, I was taking care of my family, things like that. If you give back those responses, they're just gonna stop eventually asking if you did it, and the relationship is going to just slowly wither away. And then just one day you're going to realize, oh, you don't really talk to that person anymore. And that's very easy for that to happen without you really intending it to happen. And it can certainly lead to the feeling that, oh yeah, this is, yeah, that you may feel like you're good friends with somebody, in reality you're not, because you're not actually interacting with that person. But yeah, that's a bit of advice I guess I can give, not video game related per se. Well, at a certain level it can be video game related. Play video games your friends are playing, certainly play with them, and work on the relationships and human interactions more than the video game virtual interactions. Here's an example of the balance CSS that I've enabled. So when this wraps around, it tries to balance everything out. Now, unfortunately, Firefox does not support the pretty style, where pretty would have taken the word, probably October 31st should have been put up here, so that the top part is always larger than the bottom part of a wrapping. Apparently it's pretty processor intensive to do pretty, and it's really only supposed to be at most 10 lines that it would try and balance things out in a pretty style, and Chrome only does 6 lines of that, which really shouldn't be that processor intensive, but apparently it is. So with balanced, it just tries its best to balance things out. But yeah, that is certainly much better than if I was to turn this off, and then it would just be like that. in that size. Low. Yep, same size. It's actually a little bit smaller text too. So yeah, inherently I'm changing the way the Gematsu webmaster made the page, and I'm doing it slightly better in my opinion for my needs, but not by much. It's just difficult to get web pages to look really good. The original Resident Evil 3 is coming to Good Old Games on September 25th. Several games also, though, have been delisted from Good Old Games recently, so some come and I guess some go. Although, inherently, I think most people would have assumed that Good Old Games were always going to be available for download if you'd purchase them, and that doesn't seem like that's the case now. The original versions of Resident Evil are of historical value, but not really the versions you'd want to play. Then we already had talked about Tales of the Shire coming out March 25th. And so, yeah. Here's where I can check and see that we are on page 2 of the news. And I'm pretty sure we covered all of this stories. So then let's click back to page 1. And this is 5 minutes ago, so we didn't obviously cover that, but yeah. Predator hunting grounds for PS5. So we started here and we saw this one from 2 hours ago. And we did look at all of this news in the 2 times that we ran it. So it does seem like everything's working good. As best as I can tell, the macro is now working pretty well. And we had already talked about this, so we don't need to go over that. And that probably means that we've already talked about all of this. Although inherently there is a question as to why did all of this open up a second time, because it shouldn't have. So I might have a small bug with GameDeveloper.com in that it is not saving progress. Some of these news stories are actually fairly old. And there is a limitation, certainly, on GameDeveloper.com in that I'm only looking at the first page of links on GameDeveloper.com because they don't usually have that many bits of news in a short couple of days worth of time. So if there was at some point a major burst of news from GameDeveloper.com, I might miss some of them, but that's probably never going to happen because we can see here this seems like this has opened every single link on that first page, and that's quite a few that go back really far. I think Photography Week, for instance, has come and gone at least a week ago, if not 2 weeks ago. Yep, we've talked about all of this. And this is all fairly old stuff. And yeah, I don't have on this page any more games that came out for on Steam. So I don't know what happened there, really. Feels like there should have been a game, at least one game that would have been opened up from Steam, but maybe I closed it. I did try to do a little bit of cleanup here. And if everything really is set well with my new macro, the next step is, instead of just redoing what has been done before, is to integrate in gaming on Linux. Of course, there is a middle step in there in between that, which is to reconsider defaultless cleanup too. But I may integrate gaming on Linux first, because that's new news, where faultless cleanup is just old news. And frankly, I could do faultless cleanup manually and just never talk about it, but at some point I do need to automate it, so I'm consistently doing it. So I have manually here, and I definitely haven't cleaned up the pages to look good, opened up all the gaming on Linux articles. Again, I'm just sampling this and seeing if this really should be a new news source for me. I kind of think it should be, because they talk about specifically Linux stuff that is unique, and there's not a lot of repetition there. Also, it wouldn't hurt to have one or two new news sources to get articles from, and Twitter itself is becoming just increasingly useless. At some point, Blue Sky is a consideration, as far as just, it seems like Blue Sky or Tumblr, half the audience for X/Twitter may end up just going to Blue Sky or Tumblr. But yeah, from gaming on Linux, we have a cross-platform remote play app for PlayStation, adding controller mapping and custom rendering options. You can see there's a bit of details here. That being said, a lot of it is small, so it would be difficult to read. The popular first-person shooter Fallen Aces gets Steam Deck support in the latest update, and I do feel like this is really getting to the point where that is newsworthy to say, hey, this game has updated to the point where it supports what effectively is a new way of playing it, whether via a console, which Steam Deck really is best described as a console, even if it doesn't have some of the limitations or the walled garden nature of consoles otherwise. Sega Saturn styled racer game called Parking Garage Rally Cruiser is out now. This, I assume, the case with this game in particular, since they are speaking about this game, is that there is some level of Linux support, and that gaming on Linux would not promote a game unless it supported Linux of some sort, Steam Deck more than likely being its support. Here it says Steam Deck compatibility is unknown, and what happens if we click developers comments? And they say they believe it's 100% compatible, but seemingly Steam Valve has not agreed with that. Notice here it says SteamOS plus Linux, but in the actual competition, the minimal requirements is a Linux distribution released after 2016, which is probably a bad way of saying you need Linux kernel version 5 point something, not something running on an extremely old version of Linux on like 4.0 something. You need a x86 30-bit CPU with the SSE2 instructions, which is quite specific, or a x86 64-bit CPU, which most people would have that, or you can have an ARM7 and an ARM8 CPU, which that would be closer to a mobile phone type or Raspberry Pi type device. 4 gigabytes of RAM and then something with full Vulkan 1.0 support or better, which that's pretty low requirements. There's an issue certainly with the Steam Deck as far as size and storage space, and that's inherently going to be the case with most gaming things, that you can't throw a huge hard drive into it or a huge NVMe, because we really have not gotten to the point where you can just have everything installed, and that is the desire. As far as that would be the next step of everything, is that you buy a gaming PC, you have a massive hard drive in it, and your entire Steam library can just be installed on there, and once and done. And that would work very nicely. Of course, with a Steam Deck you can stream games from a gaming PC, so the 1-2 punch of owning a Steam Deck and also owning a $3,000 gaming PC, or it doesn't really have to be $2,000, you could easily do a $1,500 gaming PC and have a very nice gaming PC, works. So there is definitely a case where you could have your entire gaming library installed on a old spinning hard drive, but then you also run into the speed issue of loading the games from an old spinning hard drive. So we still need more storage than anything. And at best, if you look at like RetroPie builds, you could probably get all of the second generation ROMs fit onto something like a 1TB micro SD card. But once you start talking about CD-ROM based PC gaming, which is, I imagine, either third or fourth generation games, I'm not sure how the generations really are going to play into that. But yeah, once you start seeing spinning disk things, even GameCube games, the size of ROMs get so big that you probably aren't fitting that on the biggest micro SD card you could reasonably afford. Yeah. So yeah, storage is a thing. But more realistically, if you aren't just trying to have everything installed at once, you are going to need probably double the storage with the next Steam Deck. So if you got like a 512 now, target a 1TB NVMe at a high speed next time you buy a Steam Deck. Which I assume people who buy Steam Decks should just plan on buying a new one every 2 or 3 years, and not expect it to last like 7 years like a Nintendo Switch has lasted for a lot of people. And certainly I think a lot of parents are going to have some shell shock around that too, sticker shock. Moving on with news stories, we don't need to go super long here. The Core Control has added power profile support for AMD RX 760. I guess Core Control is an application. I don't know, never heard of it before, so there is a lot being suggested on the SteamOS side as far as just trying to get frame rates up and power profiles so that things use less battery. And so if all of those lead to the right solutions that are better solutions, there is a chance that we might fairly quickly see a SteamOS version 4.0 that has just changed significant amounts of the underlying operating system settings to be more overclocked than you normally would see. On top of which, the Linux kernel has even added a few features where you can make certain function calls be real-time in the sense that a call to the CPU, as far as you need to do this in a certain number of seconds, can be made. Otherwise, you need to throw an error and also not really let other things happen while this is trying to happen. In reality, though, I imagine gaming would never use any of the real-time functions being added to the Linux kernel, and the Linux kernel itself will just never really be able to be run as a real-time operating system. And for the vast majority of people, you just don't want a real-time operating system. The only people that need real-time operating systems are people who are making embedded devices, such as on an ESP32, for hardware manufacturing type things, that where timing really matters. And it's just a little bit of lag in 1 millisecond doesn't really matter when you get the overall better performance that a non-real-time operating system like Windows and Linux gives you. In a lot of cases, real-time operating systems are designed that if something doesn't occur in a certain number of seconds, it's going to throw an error, and that error may very well just trigger the whole device to reboot and start all over again. My smart doorbell is kind of an example of something that almost certainly should be on a real-time operating system, and if for some reason pressing the doorbell doesn't ring the doorbell, then the system better reboot and make sure that fixes it. And when the doorbell button is pressed, it should be ringing instantaneously, not taking a few extra milliseconds to ring. And generally real-time operating systems are best used for things that are supposed to only do one thing and nothing else. And there is a wider argument as far as if something is a safety device, probably shouldn't be on an operating system at all. It probably should be run by hardware and physical lockouts and things like that. Anyways, I'm kind of rambling here. Just a To the Moon series beach episode from Freeburg Games is out now. Interesting. So here we have this game, which I had already seen. It's overwhelmingly positive. Good Old Game announces classic Resident Evil 3 Nemesis to re-release on September 25th. Notice the timing here that the Resident Evil 3 remake has come and gone, and that was about a year ago before this happens. So they clearly timed it so that the original game wouldn't in any way conflict with the remake. There's definitely a question though, as far as, did we get a Resident Evil 3 remake, or did we just get a Resident Evil 2 remake? No, I'm pretty sure we got a Resident Evil 3 remake. And we got a Resident Evil 4 remake. Yep, so now everything is caught up unless they wanted to go back and remake 1 with their newest engine, which would be understandable but weird. So otherwise they are painted in a corner where they have to remake 5, and by remaking 5 they really need to start over from scratch with 5, make some major changes. They made a pretty large amount of changes with 4 and nobody complained, so I think they probably could do 5 and make even more. The PlayStation 3 emulator RPCS3 gets expanded online play support for multiple classics. Oh yeah, PlayStation 3 emulation in particular has always been probably the hardest of all of them to do. And yeah, clearly we still are in the process of figuring out ways to do that with the current level of processing power we have, which might, and very well might, require very strong processors to emulate PS3s. This probably also speaks to a level as to why there is no PlayStation 3 emulation on the PlayStation 4 or 5 of any real level of quality, and no streaming for PlayStation 3 games available. The Heroic Games Launcher 2.15.2 released, fixing Amazon Good Old Games and Epic Games issues. I guess the Heroic Game Launcher integrates these different launchers into one. I guess you can download it from FlatHub. That is something I might consider doing, actually. Might just be easier that way. Yep. It certainly would give me more of a reason to try and claim Amazon games and Good Old Games and Epic Games from my Amazon Prime gaming giveaways. Although it's still very much the case that if you go with any of these, then the games are just not going to show up in your Steam page and your Steam library, and I'll just end up buying them a second time. So I probably won't do anything with that. Steam has broken 38 million concurrent users for the first time, and that's probably a big reason why they don't want to get rid of bots until they hit certain numbers like this. Let's see. This was September 23rd at 8:54 a.m. UTC, according to SteamDB. Then they're giving you just the top list of games being played. Satisfactory may have played a bigger role in that, but yeah. Inherently, this is just the top 10 concurrent player list that we look at every stream, and if they really took an effort to get rid of bots in Counter-Strike 2, PUBG, Dota, Banana, and I guess this SDK base is GTA 5 Fire Emblem multiplayer mod. I don't know where they get that from, but yeah, there might be a lot of bots in GTA 5 too, I'm not sure. Yeah, if they took a considered effort to get rid of all the bots here, now that they've hit 38 million, that would be probably better for showing the reality of the situation and not creating what is effectively a fictitious bubble of concurrent players. There's only so many people on the planet, and only so many people who have access to Steam and PCs they could be playing at one time. So you can't really get too much higher than this at any one time, and inherently it does just point a picture of a false narrative of gamers all playing at the same time around the world, and it's just not the case. They hit 37 million in August of 2024, and then 36 in March, and then 35 in March, and 34 in March, and 33 in January. So they're just steadily going up by a million almost with every milestone. January, February, March, and then big March, and then August. Each one of these may inherently be built around one big game coming out too. Black Myth Wukong gaining, I imagine, a lot of new Chinese players. Banana, unfortunately, being a big number there too. Mark Blade Point probably being a big factor. satisfactory being probably a big factor. Here's the story I was talking about earlier. Valve appears to be testing ARM64 and Android support for Steam on Linux. There was this Valve test app, and it was a non-VR game being tested on an ARM64 with Proton. Then when you scroll down the list, it shows that thanks to an open source project called Fax, which allows you to run x86 and x64 binaries on Arch64. It also mentioned Waydroid. So there definitely is something they were testing here that was an Android app that they were trying to get working on Steam, whereas they have not really, to my knowledge, tried to get anything Android or anything that's ARM64 based as far as the CPU processor running on Steam. Yep. And honestly, it might be very easy for them to get Android apps running on Steam on Linux, which is mostly just going to be for the Steam Deck, and then you may just see a flood of mobile games being submitted to Steam. I don't see a reason why anybody who has already launched a game on Android would have any kind of exclusivity deal with Google. Probably nothing like that exists. Maybe some storefronts like Samsung might have some exclusivity deals, but that'd be very few. I imagine that there is just going to be a whole bunch of game developers that would love to just pay $100 and put their game onto Steam and get just a few dollars of sales. There is also a factor in the Android is Google in particular is removing a lot of really old games, no longer being updated, programs, not just games but apps in general, from the Google Play Store, if they just have not been updated, and they're trying to get rid of a lot of repetitive garbage apps from the Google Play Store too. So I wouldn't be surprised if a significant number of garbage games ended up on Steam if this happens. It's just an amazingly good sales pitch, even if it's something you never actually use, to tell people when you buy a Steam Deck you can sideload, or it looks like directly install, in this case, a Android app, and continue to play your favorite Android games. I don't know why this would potentially make games be supported for longer, though, because I don't think you have to continuously pay any kind of annual fee to be listed on the Google Play Store. And certainly you could always just upload a game yourself. There is also a downside, certainly, if you put your game on Steam, is that you're not likely going to be able to integrate the Google ads to it. So a lot of the garbage games that are designed just to show ads to you may never come to Steam because they may not have any value. And I don't think we're going to see Steam and Valve offering an ad service like AdSense, where you play a game on Steam and then you're seeing pop-up ads for other Steam games. That probably would never happen, or pop-up ads for other things probably never happen. Although it is a little crazy that you play one game and then you often do see pop-up ads on Androids for other games. Steam Deck OS 3.6.1.14 beta has been released with a Flatpak security fix. So just a couple of fixes. These updates are coming fairly quickly these days, so it does seem like they are working on it more. But I kind of wouldn't be surprised if you only saw a 3.7 or you never saw a 3.7 and they just jumped to a 4.0. Inherently, if they go to 4.0, that implies that there's going to be something not backward compatible, that it's going to break something. So if they can just keep everything backward compatible, they would go to a 3.7. But they may just skip to a 4.0 because it sounds more interesting and announce a new Steam Deck with a Steam OS 4.0. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they also just arbitrarily, for no good reason, said that the LCD first generation Steam Decks can't go to Steam OS 4.0. Which they might do that, but we really haven't seen evidence of Valve doing that before. But Valve is certainly dropping Windows support quickly. Wine 9.18 brings a new Media Foundation backend using FFmpeg, which Wine is part of Proton. It gets ported over. Proton is effectively, I think, a fork of Wine. So this potentially means that some of the older games on older Windows games using Proton may be able to play new media, which I'm not sure how many games really use new media, but I bet there was a couple of them, if I'm understanding that right now. There's a Humble Bundle with Rain World, Duck Game, Jazzpunk, Death Gambit, and more available. Some of these games are Steam Deck verified in the Humble Bundle. I guess if you buy them from the Humble Bundle, then you are, if you pay enough, I assume, getting the Steam keys also. It's been a while since I've looked at Humble Bundle and considered anything. They were getting to be fairly expensive and not good offers most of the time. Let's see. The GTA 5 GTA Online highlights Steam Deck verification system problems. In part, I think this is an editorial highlighting how the GTA 5 and GTA Online have changed their anti-cheat to GameEye, but not done it in a way so that it could be still played on the Steam Deck. And so now the Steam Deck compatibility page, as they're showing here, they should have drawn a big circle around it so you can see it, says that it's playable on the Steam Deck when it's really not. The truth of it is you could go into offline mode and play the story on Steam Deck, and that's it. And it certainly would be a way in which Valve could flex its muscle a little bit by saying, if you change the anti-cheat, if you do a new update, we're going to remove the Steam Deck compatibility marker, or at least very much re-verify it. They probably don't have great automated systems for that when a new update is pushed up to double check to make sure it doesn't crash to desktop when it played on the Steam Deck. Notice though that the Steam Deck thing compatibility page also doesn't allow you as the owner of a game, of the player of a game, to flag a game from that page. There's no flag this as incorrect button there, so you could certainly just have gamers flag games that aren't actually compatible. It does sometimes bring up a pop-up on the Steam Deck asking you was that actually playable or not, but from this page you can't do it. Perhaps that's intentional because they don't want people flagging it unless they actually did just try the game on the Steam Deck so that they can get more accurate information. God of War Ragnarok released and was Steam Deck verified. It needs a launch option for desktop Linux. I've really got no excuse at this point that I haven't played any of the God of War remakes, other than perhaps the fact that you can't really cover any of the previous God of War games. Just haven't gotten around to buying the game or playing it. Let's see, Pocket Pair responded to the Nintendo Pokemon Company lawsuit. This is probably the same statement we've already seen. And then 2 Point Museum releases March 4th, with pre-orders now open. And see, these were all of the news stories on the front page of Gaming on Linux, and it's adding maybe 20 minutes of content, but it's 20 minutes I think of pretty good content too. GNOME 47 Denver has been released with accent colors and various system enhancements. Now, once I actually do get it into my workflow, these stories would just show up, I think, probably after GameDeveloper.com. Although there is definitely an argument to consider putting it before GameDeveloper.com, because I think gaming on the Steam Deck is more interesting than industry-focused articles. GNOME noticeably is not what's used in the Steam Deck though, so GNOME coming out with more accent colors and system enhancements is nice for people using the GNOME desktop. But it's not going to help any Steam Deck players, and it does highlight that there's several different desktops and they all have their own quirks, and frankly I don't think any of them are polished enough as much as they should be. I think GNOME does run on Wayland, whereas the current version of KDE that's on the Steam Deck desktop mode actually doesn't run directly on Wayland. Wayland overall is what you want to see them supporting, because that's just going to give you more performance. Warhammer 40k, Dawn of War, and Dawn of War 2 games get free Anniversary Edition upgrades. One would assume that this is another game that runs on Linux. Apparently it runs natively on Linux, according to that tag. Last Epoch has dropped the native Linux version. Devs tell players to use Proton instead. I think we may very well see that happens fairly commonly too as we go forward, as Proton becomes more than acceptable as just a compatibility layer. You'll see less and less game developers spending the extra energy and the extra time and money making native Linux builds, particularly since even native Linux builds are awkward in that you either are making snaps for Ubuntu or Flatpaks for KDE games or Fedora Arch-based operating systems, instead of Ubuntu being somewhat Debian or deb files for Debian. Also, there's just like 5 different ways you could pack it, and then you could also pack it certainly as just a source code, and then you have to compile the source code yourself, and that no gamer really wants to go through all that hassle. So yeah, it's still, it may very well be the case that 20-30 years down the line everybody is playing on a SteamOS Linux operating system, and yet game developers are still going to be building windows.exe files just as a way of having some kind of uniformity of the format of games to be released. I'm not sure if you really could release a flat pack game on Steam. That's an interesting thought. I'm not sure if that's one of the native Linux versions you can even offer. You probably could, but then you would also limit yourself to Arch-based operating systems of Linux. Yep. And so that was this entire front page of news, and most of those I think were news stories that were worth talking about, and almost all of them were new news stories also. And page 2 here from 3 days ago says Microsoft embraces more open standards with DirectX 12 adopting SPIR-V, which I don't know what that is, but it sounds like it's a standard that isn't just being directly developed as an API by Microsoft. And Proton 9.0-3 has been released. Let's see, here's 29 games are getting delisted from Good Old Games. And I think we already kind of covered the rest of these stories. Let's see, here's the list of games being delisted, some of which are Adult Swim games, so that may have to do more with Adult Swim really being shut down completely. And then several more games are here on the list. And like I recognize Headlander and Westerado Double Barreled. I may recognize. I doubt any of these games are just going to be super big games. Yeah, I don't really recognize the rest of these. Alright, well, then that's going to be it for this stream. Another shorter, sweeter stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, and keep on watching. Thanks.